The phone rang at exactly 2:47 a.m., just like it had every single night for the past month. I grabbed it on the second ring, my hand moving automatically even though my stomach still twisted every time. Pine Ridge Motel. This is... I caught myself and went quiet, listening to the static clear into something that made my chest tight. Dad's voice came through, desperate and pleading, begging me to say something, to answer him, to help him. The same words he'd probably said in those final moments at the construction site, when the scaffolding gave way and no one could reach him in time. 30 seconds. I counted them off in my head, watching the second hand on my cheap watch tick by while Dad's voice got more frantic. When I hung up, my hands were shaking worse than they had during my first week. You'd think I'd be used to it by now, but hearing him beg like that still felt like someone was scraping out my insides with a rusty spoon. I checked the trail cameras next, scrolling through the feeds on the old monitor. There, that ragged figure moving between the trees again, just at the edge of the camera's range. It looked more solid tonight, less like a shadow and more like something that had once been human. The way it moved reminded me of someone searching for something they'd lost. I grabbed a pack of cigarettes from the carton Lee kept behind the desk and some beef jerky from my personal stash. This was something I'd started doing a couple weeks ago when I noticed the figure seemed calmer on nights when I left things out. Maybe it was stupid, but the rules didn't say anything about not feeding whatever was out there, and anything that kept the atmosphere less hostile seemed worth trying. The night air hit me like a slap when I stepped outside. October in northern Manitoba was no joke, and my breath came out in little puffs as I walked toward the dumpster. I set the cigarettes and jerky on the ground nearby, not too close to look like I was trying to trap something, but close enough that whatever was out there would find them. That's when headlights swept across the parking lot. I froze, watching a silver rental car pull up to the office. The engine cut off and a tall guy in his 30s climbed out, carrying a messenger bag and looking way too comfortable for someone showing up at a creepy motel in the middle of nowhere at 3 in the morning. "You must be Eliana," he said, walking over like we'd planned to meet. "I'm Cooper Snyder. Lee sent me." I stayed where I was, every instinct screaming that something was wrong. Lee didn't mention anyone coming by. Part-time position, night shift support. Cooper pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. He said you might need some help with the workload. The paperwork looked official enough. Pine Ridge Motel letterhead, what looked like Lee's signature, all the right words about employment and responsibilities. But I'd been working here a month, and Lee had never once suggested I needed help. If anything, he seemed to prefer keeping the night shift as isolated as possible. "What kind of support?" I asked, not moving any closer. "General maintenance, guest services, whatever comes up." Cooper's smile was friendly, but his eyes kept scanning the building behind me. Lee mentioned there are some specific procedures I should learn. That made my skin crawl. Like what? "Oh, you know, which areas need special attention, any safety protocols, that sort of thing." He gestured toward the motel. "Mind if we head inside? It's pretty cold out here." I wanted to tell him to leave, but if Lee really had hired him, refusing to let him in would probably cost me my job. And I needed this job, even if it was slowly driving me crazy. The pay was too good, and my family was counting on the money I sent home. "Sure," I said, leading him back toward the office, "but it's pretty quiet work. Mostly just answering phones and keeping an eye on things." Cooper followed me inside, and I watched him take in every detail of the lobby. His gaze lingered on the basement door, then moved to the hallway leading to the guest rooms. When he looked at room 8's door, something shifted in his expression, like he was confirming something he already knew. "How many guests do you usually get?" he asked. "Not many, maybe 1 or 2 a week." I settled back behind the desk, keeping the counter between us. "Most nights it's just me." "And you handle everything alone? That seems like a lot for one person." I shrugged. "It's not that complicated. Check people in, answer the phone, make sure nothing gets damaged." "What about room 8?" Lee mentioned it might need special attention. My blood went cold. Lee had specifically told me never to discuss room 8 with anyone, and here was this guy asking about it like it was common knowledge. "It's just another room," I said carefully. "Nothing special about it." Cooper nodded, but I caught him glancing toward the hallway again. "And the basement? Any maintenance issues down there I should know about?" "The basement's off limits. Lee's orders." "Right, of course." Cooper set his bag down and pulled out what looked like a tablet. "Mind if I take some notes? I want to make sure I understand the procedures correctly." The lights flickered at 3:15, just like they did every night. I tensed automatically, waiting for the usual sounds. Footsteps in the hallway, scratching at the basement door. The general sense that something was waking up and paying attention. Cooper didn't even blink. He just kept looking at his tablet like flickering lights in a supposedly empty building were perfectly normal. That's when I realized I had no idea what Lee's signature actually looked like. I'd never seen him sign anything in front of me, never had any reason to compare handwriting. For all I knew, Cooper could have written that paperwork himself. "You seem pretty calm for someone starting a new job," I said. "I've worked nights before. You get used to the weird atmosphere." Cooper looked up from his tablet. "Places like this always have their quirks. Places like this." Like he knew exactly what kind of place this was. "I'd like to stick around for the rest of your shift," Cooper continued. "Get a feel for the routine, see how things work." "That's really not necessary." Lee insisted. "He wants to make sure I'm properly trained before I start working alone." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? That I was afraid he'd notice the supernatural activity? That having him here felt like letting a predator into my territory? That every instinct I'd developed over the past month was screaming that this guy was dangerous? Instead, I nodded and tried to look like a normal employee dealing with a normal situation. "Okay, but like I said, it's pretty boring work." Cooper smiled and settled into one of the lobby chairs, positioning himself where he could see both the front desk and the hallway. "I'm sure I'll find it educational." The way he said that made my stomach twist. Educational. Like he was here to study something specific. I turned back to the desk, pretending to organize paperwork while my mind raced. The past month had been exhausting, jumping at every sound, following rules I didn't understand, dealing with phone calls from my dead father and whatever was lurking in the basement. I was running on maybe 4 hours of sleep a day, living on coffee and adrenaline, sending most of my paycheck home while surviving on ramen and whatever cheap food I could find. And now this. Someone who might be legitimate help or might be something much worse. I could feel Cooper watching me, taking mental notes about everything I did. The way I kept glancing at the basement door, how I positioned myself to see both the front entrance and the hallway, the careful distance I maintained from room 8, whatever was out there in the trees, whatever lived in the basement, whatever made the phone ring every night. It all fed on fear. And right now, I was afraid of the man sitting 10 feet away from me, afraid of what he really wanted, afraid that my month of careful survival was about to fall apart. The worst part was not knowing if that fear was justified, or if I was just being paranoid, because this place had gotten under my skin, but I'd learned to trust my instincts here. And every single one of them was telling me that Cooper Snyder was not what he claimed to be. I dialed Lee's number the second my shift ended, my fingers shaking as I punched in the digits. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before his voicemail picked up. "You've reached Lee Estrada. Leave a message and I'll get back to you." I hung up without saying anything. Lee always answered his phone. Always. In the month I'd been working here, he'd picked up on the first ring every single time I called, no matter what hour. The fact that he wasn't answering now, right after Cooper showed up claiming Lee had hired him, made my stomach clench. Cooper was still sitting in the lobby chair when I walked back inside, typing something on his tablet. He looked up with that same easy smile that had been setting my teeth on edge all night. "Everything okay?" he asked. Fine. Just checking in with Lee about the schedule change. Good idea. Communication is important in a place like this. Cooper stood up and stretched. Mind if I grab my equipment from the car? I like to get set up early. Equipment. What kind of equipment? Research tools, electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras, audio recording devices. Standard paranormal investigation gear. My blood turned to ice water. He'd just admitted it outright, like he expected me to know what he was talking about, like the supernatural stuff here was common knowledge. I thought you said you were here for maintenance and guest services. Cooper's smile didn't waver. Those too, but Lee was pretty specific about documenting any unusual activity. You know how it is. No, I didn't know how it was. I didn't know anything about what Lee had told him or why he thought I'd be okay with paranormal investigators setting up shop in my workplace. But Cooper was already heading for the door like the conversation was over. I'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. The way he said it sounded less like a request and more like an order. I waited until his car door slammed before grabbing the phone again. This time I left a message. Lee, it's Eliana. Someone named Cooper Snyder showed up claiming you hired him. He's asking about supernatural activity and wants to install monitoring equipment. I need you to call me back immediately and tell me what's going on. Cooper returned carrying a metal case that looked expensive and professional. He set it down in the lobby and started pulling out devices I didn't recognize. Small black boxes with blinking lights, cameras the size of matchbooks, cables and sensors that looked like they belonged in a science lab. So, he said, not looking up from his equipment, tell me about the previous night clerk, Rosie, right? I went completely still. I don't know what you're talking about. Come on, Eliana. Lee mentioned there was someone before you. Young woman worked here for a few weeks before she quit. He said she might have left some notes about the job. I'm the first night clerk. The lie came out automatically, but Cooper's knowing look told me he didn't believe it for a second. Really? Because I found some interesting employment records. Rosie Hanson, hired 4 months ago, disappeared without giving notice. Cooper finally looked up at me. Same night you started working, actually. Quite a coincidence. My mouth went dry. I thought about the belongings I'd found in the back office during my first week. Women's clothes, a journal with careful handwriting, a Pine Ridge Motel name tag that said Rosie. I'd assumed they belonged to some previous employee from years ago, not someone who'd vanished the night I arrived. I don't know anything about that. What about the rules, Eliana? The specific procedures for handling supernatural incidents? Did Rosie leave any documentation about those? He knew. Somehow, this guy knew about the rules, about the phone calls, about everything I'd been dealing with for the past month. And he was asking about them like they were standard operating procedures. I think you should leave, I said. Cooper packed up his equipment with deliberate slowness. I'll be back tonight. Lee's expecting a full report on the paranormal activity levels. He paused, studying one of his devices with a frown. Actually, these readings are already showing some unusual fluctuations. My equipment might be destabilizing the existing supernatural patterns just by being here. Don't be surprised if the usual timing gets disrupted. Phone calls coming at different hours, that sort of thing. Lee didn't hire you. We'll see about that. Cooper headed for the door, then paused. Oh, and Eliana, you might want to get some sleep. Tonight's going to be very educational, and if I'm right about these electromagnetic disturbances, don't be surprised if the usual patterns start breaking down. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, my heart hammering. Everything about this felt wrong. Cooper knew too much. Lee wasn't answering his phone, and now I was supposed to believe that my predecessor had disappeared the exact same night I'd started working here. I walked back to my cabin on shaking legs, but sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cooper's smirk when he mentioned Rosie's name, like he knew exactly what had happened to her, like he might have been involved. Around noon, I was jolted awake by someone pounding on my cabin door. I stumbled over, still half asleep, and opened it to find a woman about my age with intense dark eyes and the kind of posture that suggested she was ready for a fight. "Are you Eliana Rodriguez?" she demanded. "Who's asking?" "Lauren Salinas. I'm looking for my sister." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo, a young woman with strawberry blonde hair and green eyes, wearing a Pine Ridge Motel uniform. "Her name is Rosie Hansen. She worked here 4 months ago." The photo hit me like a physical blow. I recognized that face from the employee ID I'd found in the back office, the one I'd shoved into a drawer and tried to forget about. "I've never seen her before," I lied. Lauren's expression hardened. "Bullshit. I've been tracking her phone records, her credit card transactions, everything. She worked the night shift here for 3 weeks before she disappeared. You're her replacement." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Really? Because I have her final voicemail right here." Lauren tapped her phone screen. "Want to hear what she said about the rules? About the supernatural encounters, about how scared she was?" My stomach dropped. "I think you should leave." "Not until you tell me what happened to my sister." Lauren stepped closer. "Rosie called me the night she disappeared. She was terrified, talking about things that didn't make sense. Phone calls from dead people, creatures in the basement, rules she had to follow to stay safe. I thought she was having some kind of breakdown, but then she vanished and I started investigating. I can't help you. Can't or won't." Lauren's voice was getting louder. "Because I've spent 4 months following leads, talking to other families whose kids disappeared after taking jobs at isolated motels. This isn't random, Eliana. Someone is targeting desperate people and using them for something." Before I could respond, we both heard the sound of breaking glass from the direction of the motel office. Lauren and I looked at each other, then started running toward the main building. The front door was standing open, and I could hear movement inside. We crept through the lobby and found Cooper in the back office, installing some kind of device behind the desk. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted. Cooper looked up calmly. "Securing the area for safety. These electromagnetic readings are off the charts." "You broke in," Lauren said. "That's illegal." "Actually, I have authorization." Cooper pulled out that same piece of paper he'd shown me earlier. "Lee Estrada hired me to conduct a full paranormal investigation." Lauren snatched the paper from his hands and studied it. "This is fake. The letterhead is wrong, and this signature doesn't match the one on Rosie's employment contract." "You have Rosie's contract?" I asked. "I have everything. Phone records, employment documents, bank statements. I've been building a case for 4 months." Lauren turned back to Cooper. "And you, I recognize you. You've been asking questions about Rosie in town. People remember you." Cooper's friendly mask finally slipped. "I'm conducting legitimate research." "Into what? How many people you can make disappear?" Lauren stepped closer to him. "What did you do to my sister?" "I didn't do anything to anyone. I'm trying to understand what happened here." By breaking into the office and installing surveillance equipment, I gestured at the device he'd been working on. "That's not research, that's stalking." Cooper looked between Lauren and me, and I could see him calculating something. "You both need to understand that this situation is bigger than one missing person. There are forces at work here that—" "Save it," Lauren cut him off. "I've heard enough conspiracy theories to last a lifetime." "Where is Rosie?" "I don't know." "But you know something," I said. "You knew about the rules, about the supernatural activity. You came here looking for specific information." Cooper was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Rosie documented everything. Her experiences, the patterns she noticed, the rules she figured out. That documentation is valuable to certain research organizations." "Research organizations?" Lauren's voice was deadly quiet. "You mean the people who hired you to cover up what happened to her?" "Nobody hired me to cover anything up. I'm here to find answers." "By lying about Lee hiring you?" By breaking into the office? By pretending to be a maintenance worker? I shook my head. You're not here to find answers. You're here to hide them. Lauren was studying Cooper with the intensity of someone putting together a puzzle. You're not working alone. Someone sent you here because they know what happened to Rosie, and they want to make sure nobody else finds out. That's not... Then prove it, I interrupted. Call Lee right now. Have him confirm that he hired you. Cooper hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Lee's not available right now. Because he doesn't exist, or because he's part of whatever this is? Lauren demanded. Lee exists. He owns this motel, but the situation is complicated. Complicated how? Cooper looked at both of us, and I could see him weighing his options. Finally, he said, because I lied about why I was here. That maintenance paperwork I showed you? It was fake. Lee actually hired me through a third-party research firm to maintain plausible deniability about his supernatural research. I'm a paranormal investigator. Monitoring it for what purpose? I asked. To understand it, to document it, to figure out how to contain it. Lauren laughed, but there was no humor in it. Contain it, right. And how many night clerks have you people sacrificed for your research? It's not like that. Then what is it like? I stepped closer to Cooper. Because I've been following rules I don't understand, dealing with phone calls from my dead father, and living in constant terror for a month. If you know what's going on here, you need to tell us. Cooper was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, the truth is, I don't know what happened to Rosie, but I know she discovered something that made her dangerous to the people I work for, and I know that whatever she found out, it's connected to this place and the supernatural activity here. So you're here to find out what she knew, Lauren said. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen again. By doing what? Installing more surveillance equipment? Bringing in more researchers? I shook my head. You're not here to protect anyone. You're here to figure out how to exploit whatever's happening here. Cooper didn't deny it. Lauren and I looked at each other, and I could see the same realization in her eyes that was forming in my mind. We were both connected to Rosie's disappearance, but neither of us trusted Cooper's story about why he was here. And if he was telling the truth about working for some research organization, that meant there were other people involved. People who might have been responsible for whatever happened to Rosie. We need to work together, Lauren said finally. All three of us. Because right now, we're the only ones who care about finding out what really happened. Cooper nodded slowly. Agreed. But you both need to understand that the people I work for don't like loose ends. If they think you're getting too close to the truth, they'll make us disappear too, I finished. Something like that. I thought about the rules, about the phone calls, about the month of terror I'd endured while sending money home to my family. I thought about Rosie, who'd apparently gone through the same thing before vanishing without a trace. And I thought about Cooper, who claimed to be here to help, but had lied about everything from the moment he arrived. None of us trusted each other, but we were all connected to whatever had happened here 4 months ago, and if we wanted answers, we were going to have to find them together, even if it killed us. I stared at Lauren and Cooper, both of them waiting for me to say something, anything, about what I knew. My mouth felt like sandpaper. There was no getting around it anymore. They'd already figured out too much, and lying would just make everything worse. I found her journal, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Hidden in the back office during my first week, it had 5 rules written inside, the same ones Lee gave me when I started. Lauren leaned forward. What kind of rules? Things like never answer the phone before it rings twice, never go in the basement, stay away from room 8 after midnight. I wrapped my arms around myself. I thought they were just weird workplace policies until... Until what? Cooper asked. I closed my eyes, remembering that awful discovery. I found her uniform in the basement. It was torn apart and covered in blood. There were scratch marks on the walls like someone had fought down there. But no body, nothing else. Lauren went completely white. You found blood and didn't call the police? I thought she was dead, I said, the words coming out in a rush. I thought if I called anyone, they'd shut down the motel and I'd lose my job. My family needs the money I send home and I couldn't. You left my sister's blood in a basement and said nothing for a month? Lauren's voice was getting louder. Before I could answer, gravel crunched in the parking lot. We all turned to see Lee's truck pulling up to the office, moving way too fast for the small lot. Shit, Cooper muttered, quickly shoving his tablet into his bag. Lee climbed out of his truck and took one look at the three of us standing together before his face went dark. He stalked over, his eyes moving from the broken office door to Cooper's equipment case to Lauren's hostile expression. What the hell is going on here? Lee demanded. Eliana, who are these people? I'm Lauren Salinas, Lauren said before I could answer. Rosie Hansen's sister. And I want to know what you did to her. Lee's jaw tightened. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because this guy, she pointed at Cooper, claims you hired him. But when I checked your signature against Rosie's employment contract, it doesn't match. Lee turned to Cooper with a look that could have melted steel. I told you to only come at night. The daytime visits weren't part of our arrangement. Wait, I said. You do know him? Cooper pulled out a different piece of paper, this one looking more official than the fake motel letterhead he'd shown me before. Private consulting contract, paranormal investigation services for the Pine Ridge Motel property. Lauren snatched the paper from Cooper's hands and studied it. This is real, she said, looking between Lee and Cooper. So the first contract was fake, but this one's legitimate. It was supposed to be discreet, Lee said, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. Your sister quit without notice. That's not my problem. Bullshit. She called me the night she vanished, terrified out of her mind about supernatural activity. The same activity you're apparently paying this guy to investigate. Lee looked between all of us, and I could see him calculating how much trouble he was in. Everyone needs to leave now. Not until you tell us what happened to Rosie, Lauren said. Cooper was checking something on his tablet, frowning at the screen. Lee, we have a problem. The electromagnetic readings are spiking way beyond normal parameters. The equipment I installed this morning is picking up massive energy fluctuations throughout the building. This level of interference could disrupt established patterns. Even the phone call timing might be affected. What does that mean? I asked. It means something's getting agitated, Cooper said. You installed equipment? Lee's voice was getting higher. I told you to observe, not interfere. The readings were too strong to ignore. Whatever's in there is responding to increased human presence. Lauren had wandered toward the maintenance shed while we were arguing. Now she called out, Hey, there's a car back here. We all turned to look at her. She was standing behind the shed, staring at something hidden from our view. What kind of car? Lee asked, but his voice had gone flat. Silver Honda, license plate. Lauren rattled off a number that made Lee close his eyes. That's Rosie's car, I said, remembering the registration I'd seen in her journal. We walked over to where Lauren was standing. The car was covered in a tarp, but she'd pulled it back to reveal the front end. The windshield was completely smashed, spider-webbed with cracks. Deep scratches ran along the hood and doors like something with claws had attacked it. Why is my sister's car hidden behind your maintenance shed? Lauren's voice was deadly quiet. Lee ran his hands through his hair. Look, the situation here is complicated. Complicated how? The motel has a history. Things happen here that can't be explained through normal means. What kind of things? Cooper asked, still staring at his tablet. Lee looked at all of us, then seemed to make a decision. The building sits on the site of a logging camp massacre from 1923. 27 people died here, and their deaths were violent. So, you're saying the place is haunted, I said. I'm saying there are forces at work here that I don't understand. I hired Cooper to help me figure out what they are and how to deal with them. By using night clerks as test subjects? Lauren stepped closer to Lee. By putting desperate people in danger to see what would happen? It's not like that. Then what is it like? Cooper demanded. Because you told me the previous clerk had quit, not that she disappeared under suspicious circumstances. Lee was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I've been trying to understand what happened to Rosie for 4 months. That's why I hired you. And what did happen to her? Lauren asked. I don't know. She was hired 4 months ago, worked here for 3 weeks following all the safety protocols. Then one night she called me, hysterical, saying something was wrong with the rules, that they weren't protection, they were something else. When I got here the next morning, she was gone. The sun was starting to set, and I could feel that familiar heaviness settling over the property. The air seemed thicker, like it was pressing down on all of us. We need to get inside, I said. It's almost dark. Why does that matter? Lauren asked. Before I could answer, the lights in room 8 flickered on by themselves. We all stared at the window, watching the curtains move even though there was no wind. Then we heard it. A slow, deliberate scratching sound coming from the direction of the basement door. Cooper's tablet started beeping frantically. Energy levels are off the charts. Whatever's in there, it knows we're here. Lee looked at all of us with something that might have been regret. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I just wanted to understand what was happening here. Well, congratulations, Lauren said. Now we're all in danger. The scratching sound got louder and I could hear something else underneath it, a low humming that seemed to come from the building itself. The rules, I said suddenly. We need to follow the rules. What rules? Lauren asked. I looked at Lee, then at Cooper, then back at Lauren. The ones that might be the only thing keeping us alive. The clock on the desk read 9:58 p.m. when I walked back into the motel office, my stomach churning with dread. Lee had grudgingly agreed to let Cooper continue his investigation during the night shift, though he'd made it clear he was furious about the daytime disruption to what he called normal operations. Lauren refused to leave without answers about Rosie, and Cooper said his equipment needed overnight monitoring to collect proper data. So here we were, 4 people who didn't trust each other, about to spend the night in a building where supernatural entities had apparently been feeding on terror for months. You sure you want to do this? Lauren asked as I settled behind the front desk. She'd positioned herself in one of the lobby chairs where she could watch both the hallway and the basement door. I don't have a choice. Lee made it clear that if I don't work tonight, I'm fired. Cooper was crouched near the basement door, adjusting some kind of camera mounted on a tripod. The thermal imaging should pick up any temperature fluctuations that indicate supernatural presence, he said without looking up. And the electromagnetic sensors will alert us to energy spikes before they become dangerous. Dangerous how? I asked. Well, theoretically, if the entities become agitated enough, they could manifest physically rather than just psychologically. Lauren shot him a look. You mean they could actually hurt us instead of just scaring us? It's possible. Lee emerged from the back office carrying a stack of old ledgers. I'm going through the historical records to see if there are any patterns Cooper's equipment might have missed. I checked the time again. 10 p.m. exactly. In less than 5 hours, the phone would ring with my father's voice, and I'd have to decide whether to follow the rules or break them. The thought made my hands shake. Cooper finished with his camera and moved to the hallway, setting up another device outside room 8. Through the window, I could see him adjusting settings on a tablet, his face lit by the screen's glow. What exactly is he looking for? Lauren asked Lee. Evidence, documentation, proof that what's happening here can be measured and understood. And then what? You publish a research paper about how you've been feeding people to ghosts? Lee's jaw tightened. The situation is more complex than you understand. Then explain it. Before Lee could answer, the lights flickered. Not the usual 3:15 a.m. flicker I'd grown accustomed to, but a rapid strobing that made shadows dance across the walls. Cooper's equipment started beeping from multiple locations. "That's not normal," I said, checking the clock. "The lights never flicker this early." Cooper came jogging back from the hallway, staring at his tablet. "Something's wrong. The electromagnetic readings just spiked to levels I've never seen before." "What does that mean?" "It means the entities are responding to our presence differently tonight. The patterns are changing." The phone rang. I stared at it in shock. It was 11:43 p.m., 3 hours and 4 minutes before the usual time. Cooper's equipment must be disrupting everything, just like he'd warned it might when he'd set up the initial monitoring devices this afternoon. The phone had never, not once in the entire month I'd worked here, rung at any time other than 2:47 a.m. "Don't answer it," Lee said quickly. "Why not?" "Because it's not time. The rules specify." "Screw the rules," Lauren interrupted. "Answer it." The phone kept ringing. On the 4th ring, I picked it up. "Pine Ridge Motel, this is..." Static filled the line, but underneath it I could hear voices. Multiple voices, all talking at once, their words overlapping and distorting. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, trying to make sense of what they were saying. Then one voice cut through the others, clear and desperate. "Eliana? Eliana, can you hear me?" My blood went cold. It wasn't my father's voice. It was a woman's voice, young and terrified. "Who is this?" "It's Rosie. Listen to me carefully. The equipment is making everything unstable. They're breaking their own patterns now." I looked at Cooper, who was staring at his tablet with growing alarm. "Rosie, where are you?" "They're not just watching anymore, Eliana. They're getting stronger. You need to check the guest registry. Look for R. Mills." "Rosie, I don't understand. Room 8. It's not empty. It's never been empty. Check the registry and you'll see." The line went dead. I hung up the phone with shaking hands. That was Rosie. She's alive. Lauren jumped up from her chair. "What did she say?" "She said to check the guest registry for someone named R. Mills." Lee had gone completely white. "You can't trust what you hear on those calls. The entities manipulate..." "Shut up," Lauren snapped. She was already moving toward the front desk. "Where's the guest registry?" I pulled out the current ledger, but Lauren shook her head. "Not that one. The old ones. Historical records." Lee reluctantly handed over one of the ledgers he'd been carrying. Lauren flipped through pages of faded entries, her finger tracing down columns of names and dates. "Here," she said suddenly. "R. Mills, room 8, checked in September 15th, 1923. "That's impossible," Cooper said. "That's almost 100 years ago." Lauren kept flipping pages. September 16th, 1923, R. Mills, room 8, September 17th, September 18th. She looked up at us. "It goes on for weeks. The same name, the same room, every single day." "Let me see that," Lee said, but Lauren pulled the ledger away from him. "R. Mills has been checked into room 8 continuously since 1923. Every day for 100 years. She grabbed another ledger. "And it's still going. Look, last month, this month, yesterday. R. Mills, room 8. Cooper's thermal camera started beeping frantically. He looked at the display and his face went pale. "There's someone standing outside room 8 right now." We all turned toward the hallway. I couldn't see anything, but Cooper's screen showed a clear, human-shaped heat signature standing directly in front of the door. "That's not possible," I whispered. "I can see the hallway. There's nobody there." "The camera doesn't lie," Cooper said. "Something with human body temperature is standing in that exact spot." Lauren was still flipping through ledgers. "Lee, what happened on September 15th, 1923? Lee was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "That's when the massacre started." Cooper's equipment started beeping from multiple locations throughout the building. He was running between devices, checking readings that seemed to be climbing higher by the minute. "We need to check the trail cameras," I said suddenly. "If the patterns are changing, maybe the figure outside is doing something different too." I pulled up the camera feeds on the old monitor. The first camera showed the usual view of the tree line, but something was wrong. Instead of one ragged figure moving between the trees, there were three. Three identical shapes, all moving in a slow circle around the building. "They're multiplying," Cooper said, looking over my shoulder at the screen. "Or we're seeing them as they really are for the first time," Lauren said grimly. The basement door creaked. We all turned to look at it, watching as it slowly swung open about 6 inches, then closed again, then opened, then closed, like something was testing the lock. Scratching sounds started coming from the direction of room 8. Lee sat down heavily in one of the lobby chairs. "I need to tell you all something." "What now?" Lauren demanded. "The entities here, they need to feed. That's how they maintain their strength to keep the deeper threat contained." "What deeper threat?" "Something that was here before the massacre. Something the victims' spirits have been holding back for 100 years. Cooper's tablet was beeping so frantically now that he had to turn down the volume. "Lee, what exactly have you been feeding them?" Lee looked at each of us in turn. "Previous night clerks. When they learned too much or tried to leave early, the entities would take them. It kept the balance." "You've been murdering your employees," Lauren said, her voice deadly quiet. "I've been making necessary sacrifices to prevent something much worse from escaping." "And Rosie found out," I said, the pieces clicking together. "That's why she tried to leave. She discovered that the rules weren't protection, they were a feeding schedule. The phone calls, the fear, the constant terror. It was all designed to generate the emotional energy the entities needed." Lauren stood up slowly. "You killed my sister." "The entities killed her when she tried to break the pattern. I tried to stop them, but you let it happen because it was convenient for your sick experiment." The scratching from room 8 was getting louder, and now I could hear something else underneath it, a low humming that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Cooper looked up from his tablet. "The containment barriers are breaking down. Whatever Lee's been doing to maintain the balance, it's not working anymore. Because you brought in equipment that's interfering with the supernatural ecosystem," Lee said. "The entities are getting confused, agitated. They don't know how to respond to electromagnetic manipulation." The basement door swung open wider this time, and I could see darkness beyond it that seemed deeper than it should be. Something was moving down there, something large enough to cast shadows that reached the top of the stairs. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now." "We can't leave," Cooper said. "If the containment fails completely, whatever's down there will get out." "Then what do you suggest?" Before anyone could answer, the lights went out completely. In the darkness, I could hear the basement door slam open, footsteps on the stairs, and something that sounded like claws scraping against concrete. Cooper's equipment was still beeping, the sounds echoing through the black lobby like electronic screams, and from room 8 I heard a voice calling my name. The basement door slammed shut so hard the whole building shook. In the sudden silence that followed, Lee's face looked gray in the emergency lighting that had kicked on. "Okay," he said, his voice barely steady. "I need to tell you what's really happening here." "About time," Lauren snapped, but I could hear the fear underneath her anger. Lee walked over to the front desk and pulled out a thick manila folder I'd never seen before. 4 months ago, I made contact with Blackwood Paranormal Research. They offered me a solution to the supernatural problem here. Cooper was still staring at his tablet, but I noticed he'd gone very quiet. "What kind of solution?" I asked. "Containment. They said they could trap the entities, study them, maybe even eliminate them permanently." Lee opened the folder, revealing official-looking documents with corporate letterheads. All I had to do was provide access and, test subjects. Test subjects, Lauren repeated slowly. Night clerks. People who were already desperate, already isolated. People who wouldn't be missed right away if something went wrong. My stomach dropped. You've been feeding us to them on purpose. Not feeding. Testing their responses, measuring their capabilities, finding their weaknesses. Lee looked at Cooper. Tell them. Cooper finally looked up from his tablet. I'm not just a paranormal investigator. I work for Blackwood Research. Lee hired me through a consulting firm to maintain plausible deniability. Yes, I showed you fake maintenance paperwork initially when I first arrived. But the paranormal investigation contract I showed you later is real, through other channels. You lied to us, I said. Everyone lied to everyone, Cooper said. But the equipment I brought isn't for investigation, it's for containment. We've been trying to trap the entities for months. My monitoring systems have been remotely tracking this site for weeks before I arrived. That's why the usual pattern started disrupting earlier than expected. Lauren had gone very still. Where's my sister? Lee and Cooper exchanged a look that made my blood run cold. Rosie is alive, Lee said finally. Lauren shot to her feet. Where is she? Room 8. That's impossible. I can see room 8 from here. It's empty. No, Cooper said quietly. It's not. He pulled up something on his tablet and turned the screen toward us. It showed a thermal image of room 8, and there was definitely a human-shaped heat signature lying on the bed. Motionless, but definitely there. She's been there for 4 months, Lee said. The entities. They don't just kill people who break the rules. Sometimes they keep them. Keep them for what? As a primary power source. Rosie discovered too much too quickly, so they took her before she could leave. But instead of killing her, they've been slowly draining her fear and life energy while keeping her alive. Lauren was already moving toward the hallway, but Lee grabbed her arm. You can't just walk in there. The room is saturated with supernatural energy. Anyone who enters without proper protection gets trapped too. Then how do we get her out? Cooper was checking his equipment readings again. The containment field should be able to disrupt their hold on her, but we need to activate it at exactly the right moment. What about Eliana? Lauren asked. If Rosie was the primary source, why did they need another night clerk? Lee looked at me with something that might have been guilt. Supplemental feeding. The entities need regular terror to maintain their strength, especially while they're keeping Rosie alive. Eliana's nightly fear, following the rules, taking the phone calls. It's all been providing extra energy. And eventually Rosie would have died from the drain and Eliana would have been moved to room 8 as the replacement. I felt sick. You were grooming me to be the next long-term victim. I was trying to buy time to find a permanent solution. By sacrificing people. By making necessary choices to prevent something much worse. The scratching from room 8 suddenly stopped. We all turned to look down the hallway, and I could see light seeping out from under the door. Not electric light, but something that flickered like candlelight. Cooper's tablet started beeping frantically. The containment field is destabilizing. Something's interfering with the electromagnetic barriers. What does that mean? Before he could answer, the basement door exploded outward. Not opened. Exploded, like something had hit it from the inside with tremendous force. Wood splinters flew across the lobby, and I could see darkness beyond the doorway that seemed to move and writhe. The basement entity, Lee whispered. The containment failure is letting it rise. Something emerged from the basement stairs. It looked almost human at first, but as it climbed higher, I could see it was covered in coarse black hair with arms that were too long and fingers that ended in claws. Its face was wrong, features that might have been human once but had been stretched and distorted into something predatory. What is that thing? The original threat, Lee said, backing away from the basement. What the 1923 massacre victims died trying to contain. The creature turned toward us, and I could see its eyes were completely black. It opened its mouth and made a sound like grinding metal. Cooper was frantically typing on his tablet. "I'm activating the containment field now. Everyone stay back." A high-pitched whine filled the air, and the lights started strobing. The creature from the basement stumbled, covering its ears, but it didn't stop moving toward us. Then room 8's door swung open. Rosie was standing in the doorway, but she looked wrong. Her skin was pale and translucent, and her hair moved like she was underwater. Behind her, I could see other figures, shadowy shapes that looked like people but weren't quite solid. "Lauren?" Rosie's voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. Lauren started running toward her sister, but the basement creature turned at the sound and lunged. It caught Lee instead, its claws raking across his chest. He screamed and went down, blood spreading across the lobby floor. Cooper's containment device was making the whining sound louder, but instead of trapping anything, it seemed to be making everything worse. The creature was getting more agitated. The figures around Rosie were becoming more solid, and I could hear something else moving in the basement, something much larger than what had already come up. "The device isn't working," I shouted over the noise. "It's not supposed to trap them," Cooper yelled back. "It's supposed to disrupt their connection to the basement entity. But something's wrong with the frequency." Rosie took a step out of room 8, and the temperature in the lobby dropped 20 degrees. The other figures followed her. I could see now that they were wearing Pine Ridge Motel uniforms. Previous night clerks, all of them pale and translucent like Rosie. "How many people have you killed?" Lauren screamed at Lee, who was trying to stop the bleeding from his chest. "Not killed," he gasped. "Transformed. The entities don't destroy people. They convert them into guardians for the basement seal." The basement creature was moving toward Rosie now, and she was backing away from it, the ghostly figures of former clerks forming a protective circle around her. "They're not the enemy," I realized suddenly. "The spirits of the night clerks. They're trying to protect her." Protect her from what? From the basement came a sound like the earth itself cracking open. Whatever was down there, whatever the 1923 massacre victims had died trying to contain, was finally breaking free. And Cooper's equipment had just destroyed the only thing keeping it trapped. The sound from the basement wasn't just loud. It was the kind of noise that made your bones ache, like the earth was splitting apart underneath us. The basement creature that had clawed Lee was backing away from the doorway now, and I could see why. Something much bigger was coming up those stairs. But then Rosie spoke, and her voice cut through all the chaos. "They remember now," she said, looking at the translucent figures around her. The equipment breaking everything. It made them remember what they were supposed to be doing. The ghostly night clerks weren't moving like hunters anymore. Instead of that predatory stalking I'd seen in the security footage, they were positioning themselves between us and the basement door, protecting us. "Lee was wrong," Rosie continued, her voice getting stronger. "The spirits weren't feeding on us. They were testing us." "Testing us for what?" Lauren asked, still trying to get closer to her sister. "For the right bloodline. Someone who could restore the original agreement." Cooper's tablet was sparking now, the containment device making a grinding noise like it was tearing itself apart. "The electromagnetic field is collapsing," he shouted. "Whatever's in the basement is going to break through." That's when it hit me. The rules weren't random workplace policies. They were steps in a protective ritual. And if something had gone wrong with the protection, maybe running the steps backwards could fix it. "I need to follow the rules in reverse," I said. "What are you talking about?" Lauren demanded. "The phone call always comes last, right? At 2:47 a.m. But what if that's supposed to be first?" The basement door frame was starting to crack. Whatever was down there was pushing against the opening, trying to force its way up. The ghostly night clerks were holding their ground, but I could see them flickering like candles in a strong wind. "Eliana, we need to get out of here," Cooper said, but his voice sounded wrong. When I looked at him, his eyes had gone completely black. "Cooper?" He smiled, and it wasn't his smile anymore. "The old agreement is broken, little guardian. Time for a new arrangement?" The thing wearing Cooper's face started walking toward room 8, and I understood. The entity from the basement wasn't just trying to escape. It was trying to take over the protective system entirely. "Lauren, I need you to help me get to the basement," I said. "Are you insane? The seal is down there. If we can fix it before that thing fully possesses Cooper, we might be able to restore the original protection." Rosie nodded. "The spirits will help. They've been waiting for someone who could complete the ritual properly." The ghostly figures parted, creating a path to the basement door. Lee was still bleeding on the floor, but he managed to grab my ankle as I passed. "Your great-grandfather," he gasped. "Miguel Rodriguez. He was one of the loggers in 1923. Everything clicked into place. The dreams I'd been having since childhood. The way the rules felt familiar even when they were terrifying. The reason the spirits had been testing night clerks for months. "He helped make the original deal," I said. "And died keeping it," Lee whispered. "The spirits have been corrupted for decades, but they never forgot what they were looking for." Lauren and I made it to the basement stairs just as something huge slammed against the walls below. The ghostly night clerks followed us down, their translucent forms providing just enough light to see by. The basement was nothing like I'd imagined. Instead of a storage area, it was a natural cave that stretched back into darkness. And in the center, carved into the stone floor, was a circle of symbols that looked like they'd been burned into the rock. "The seal," Rosie said, appearing beside us. "It's been cracking for years." I could see the damage, deep fissures running through the carved symbols, and something dark seeping up through the cracks. The offerings I'd been leaving outside weren't random acts of kindness. They were supposed to be placed here, on the seal, to feed the protective spirits instead of letting them hunt for sustenance. "I need to redirect the feeding," I said, pulling the cigarettes and beef jerky from my pockets. "Give them what they need willingly, instead of letting them take it by force." I placed the offerings on the intact parts of the seal, and immediately the ghostly figures became more solid, more human-looking. They weren't monsters. They were people who had died protecting others, and they'd been slowly starving for decades. But the seal was still cracked, and I could hear Cooper's voice from upstairs, except it wasn't Cooper anymore. "The old guardian calls to you, Eliana Rodriguez," the thing wearing his face was saying. "Come to room 8 and complete the transfer." "I have to go back up," I told Lauren. "Not alone." "Yes, alone. That's how the ritual works. One guardian, one choice." Lauren grabbed my hand. "What if you don't come back?" "Then you get Rosie out of here and never look back." I climbed the basement stairs, leaving Lauren with her sister and the protective spirits. In the lobby, Lee was unconscious but still breathing. The thing that had been Cooper was standing in the doorway of room 8, waiting for me. "You understand now," it said with Cooper's voice. "The bloodline calls to bloodline. Your ancestor made the agreement, and now you must renew it." "What happened to Cooper?" "He's still here, watching, learning what it means to be a guardian." I walked toward room 8, but instead of going inside, I kept walking, past the room, down the hallway, toward the front door. "Where are you going?" the entity demanded. "Outside. If you want me, you'll have to leave the building to get me." I could hear it following, Cooper's footsteps echoing behind me as I pushed through the front door into the cold October night. The moment we were both outside, I heard the basement door slam shut. The protective spirits were sealing the building, trapping the deeper threat below while the entity was distracted. "Clever," the thing said, and Cooper's face twisted into something that wasn't quite human. "But pointless. I can take you anywhere." That's when the phone started ringing inside the motel. 2:47 a.m. exactly. "I have to answer that," I said. "No, the old rules are finished. The old rules are the only thing keeping you from falling back into the basement." I ran back inside. the entity right behind me, and grabbed the phone on the second ring. Pine Ridge Motel. This is Eliana. But instead of my father's voice, I heard something else. Multiple voices speaking in unison. Mija, they said, and I recognized the word my grandmother used to call me. We have been waiting. Who is this? Your family, the ones who came before. Miguel Rodriguez sends his love. Behind me, the entity wearing Cooper's face had stopped moving. It was listening to the phone call, and for the first time, it looked uncertain. The agreement was never broken. The voices continued, only corrupted. The man Lee thought he was feeding us, but we were feeding ourselves, trying to stay strong enough to test each guardian candidate. Test them for what? For the willingness to choose protection over survival. Your great-grandfather chose to die rather than let the old hunger escape. We needed to know you would make the same choice. The entity lunged for the phone, but the ghostly night clerks materialized around it, holding it back. Cooper's real voice broke through the possession. Eliana, the equipment, destroy it. It's what's keeping the entity anchored to this plane. I grabbed Cooper's tablet and smashed it against the front desk. The high-pitched whine stopped, and the entity screamed as it was pulled away from Cooper's body. He collapsed, gasping, as the dark presence was sucked back toward the basement. The seal will hold now, the voices on the phone said, but it needs a guardian, someone to maintain the agreement, to keep the balance. What does that mean? It means you stay, Mija. You become what your great-grandfather was, a protector, not a victim. Lee stirred on the floor, blood still seeping from his chest wounds. I'm sorry, he whispered. I thought I was managing them, but they were managing me, teaching me to corrupt the system so they could test it. You helped in the end, I told him. That has to count for something. But Lee was already gone, his eyes closing for the last time. The spirits had accepted his final sacrifice. Lauren and Rosie emerged from the basement, both of them solid and human now. The protective ritual was complete. So what happens now? Lauren asked. I looked around the lobby, at Cooper's destroyed equipment, at Lee's body, at the basement door that was sealed shut again. No evidence of what had really happened here. Just another isolated motel where nothing important ever occurred. Now I work the night shift, I said, for real this time. And the rules? The rules stay, but now I understand what they're really for. Cooper was sitting up, rubbing his head. My equipment is completely destroyed. No recordings, no data, no proof of anything. Good, I said. My employers aren't going to be happy. Tell them the investigation was inconclusive. Tell them the motel is just a normal business with normal problems. And if they send someone else... I smiled, thinking about the protective spirits who were now properly fed and properly motivated. Let them try. Lauren helped Rosie to her feet. We're leaving, both of us. I know. You could come with us. I shook my head. This is where I belong, where my family needs me to be. After they left, after Cooper gathered his broken equipment and drove away, after the police came to collect Lee's body and accepted the story about a break-in gone wrong, I sat behind the front desk and waited for the next night to begin. The phone would ring at 2:47 a.m. I would answer on the second ring, and instead of my father's desperate voice, I would hear my ancestors telling me about their day, checking in, making sure I was okay. The rules weren't a trap anymore. They were a conversation, and I was finally home.